Let's get into it. Wide receiver tiers, starting with tier 1. No surprise who's at the top if you watched our mock draft, which you should from Wednesday's show. Justin Jefferson at number 1, Jamar Chase at number 2. Those are the first 2 picks in our draft. Number 3, Cooper Kupp. Number 4, Tyreek Hill.
My little Cooper Kupp there, but let's talk about Jamar Chase, who, in addition to being an absolutely animal as a fantasy football player, he is also a very wise and smart investor. Unbelievably skilled on the field and in the boardroom. Over 11 targets a game last year. When he's seen 7 or more targets, he averages over 21 fantasy points per game. This part is crazy. For his career, he averages 86 receiving yards a game. That's the 3rd highest in NFL history. You know, he's my wide receiver 2. If you take him wide receiver number 1, I mean, you know, Jamar Chase is awesome.
Yeah,
I love Jamar Chase.
I think the most
for
relevant,
many reasons.
Yeah, I know you do. I think the most relevant, it's not really a stat, but the most relevant thing about Jamar Chase, he was born in the year 2000. He's 23 years old, so he has more scope to actually get better and develop skills. As Matthew's staring off into the distance, feeling old that Jamar Chase was born in the 21st century. But guys like Tyreek Hill and Cooper Kupp, who are 30, I think we know what they are. They're not going to get better, but Chase could get better, and he'll also just get healthier. So he has huge scope to be the best player in fantasy this year.
Yeah, that's not without the realm of possibility. The other thing is that, again, we always talk about, you know, how important a quarterback is for a wide receiver's success, and obviously there's a massive connection between Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, right? I mean, they went to college together, they play in the pros together. Some have even noticed that they invest together, that both guys, really smart investors. If you just sort of look at recent investments that either of those 2 guys have done, they've done them together. They've, you know, they've both invested in some similar projects. So it's just the connection between those 2 are great. We love some Joe Burrow. We love some Jamar Chase.
We do.
Both of them, by the way, drink free forever here at the happy hour.
Indeed. And of those 4 receivers, I think there's consensus those are your top 4 wide receivers across the board. And if you just look at the quarterbacks and the situations for those 4, all right, Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, we know what Kirk Cousins is, that's fine. Stafford, what's left of Stafford in that offensive line for Kupp, and then Tua Tagovailoa, who's got his own concerns for Tyreek Hill. And then Jamar Chase has just got Joe Burrow, who's going to be one of the 10 greatest quarterbacks of all time, I suspect.
Jamar Chase has the best quarterback of any of these 4 guys, but all 4 of them finishing as the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy is within the range of outcomes. Honestly, finishing as the best wide receiver in fantasy football history within the range of outcomes. One of the guys on the list has already done it. I mean, which is Cooper Kupp. Justin Jefferson had a monster season last year as well. We know the potential of Chase and Hill. I mean, again, where did Lawrence take Tyreek Hill yesterday? Was it 2? 3?
3.
He took him at 3.
Our draft
I mean, like,
Justin
again,
Jefferson, then I took Jamar Chase, and then Lawrence took Tyreek Hill, and McCaffrey went 4th.
Yeah, I mean,
so
can't argue with any of those.
PPR
guys.
format.
They're all going to just have huge years.
All right, let's take a look at tier 2, which is kicked off by Stephon Diggs, followed by Barry's Ride or Die, who is okay. Amon-Ra St. Brown. Lions training staff drinks free today. Devontae Adams at number 7. CeeDee Lamb at 8. Followed off by, close it out there with A.J. Brown. Before we get into some of the guys in the back end, Barry, I want to ask you, can Stephon Diggs kind of sneak into tier 1? Is he that guy that's just on the outside looking in, or are these guys truly all grouped together?
No, look, I think, honestly, any one of these guys, except maybe A.J. Brown, any one of these guys could easily be a top 4 tier 1 fantasy wide receiver. Again, we talked about Amon-Ra St. Brown early in the show in terms of the massive target share. If Stephon Diggs catches 3 or 4 more touchdowns, which, by the way, is completely possible given that he's playing with Josh Allen, he could certainly be there as well. Devontae Adams has been a tier 1 wide receiver. We've seen that from him recently, and certainly, you know, given how bad we expect the Raiders to be, Jimmy Garoppolo is not a great quarterback, but he can get the ball to skilled players. We've seen Jimmy Garoppolo support a number of very highly ranked fantasy relevant wide receivers over his career in San Francisco. So any of those guys, and honestly, my buddy Eights is CeeDee Lamb to you guys, but you know, Eights, me and Eights are tight. Like, in terms of just pure skill, forgetting fantasy for a second, like, Connor, I don't know where you are, but I think CeeDee Lamb is as good as any of the people on that list from a pure skill standpoint as a wide receiver. So It's just a matter if that offense opens up and Dak can have that kind of year that we think it might be in him.
Absolutely, especially when they move him around. He could play inside, he could play outside. He's tremendous after the catch, and the target should be there. Sure, I think people get distracted by Brandon Cooks being there. Gallup a year removed further from injury. But Lamb is just so talented.
And the Mike McCarthyism. Mike McCarthy of it all.
I think that's the biggest issue.
The new McCarthyism. The new McCarthyism.
Yes.
Exactly. It's another dark day in American history.
Yeah. Previously associated with communism, now associated with just botching the clock at the end of games and bad decisions.
Which one's worse?
Yeah.
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. Ask the fans in Dallas.
Yeah.
I'll tell you which one they'll choose.
Well, I think the versatility with Lamb that you guys brought up, the fact when they started at the end of last season, just throwing him in the slot, like running him deep from the slot, this is completely unfair. They just got no chance to defend him. And I think as well, Dak Prescott, I think, has a bit of a stench on him because he threw those 2 picks. He didn't play well against the Niners in that playoff game. 1, it was against the best defense in football. 2, it's 1 game. Dak Prescott is still, I think, a top 10 quarterback in the NFL on talent, and also just in terms of volume. He's going to be able to get CeeDee Lamb the ball. CeeDee Lamb's going to be absolutely fine.
The only guy I have on that list that I don't think could make tier 1 is A.J. Brown, and it's only it's not that he doesn't have that talent. It's just a function of he's got so many talented weapons around him, and there's also, by the way, a run-first offense. A slow-paced offense is going to have a really good defense. They're not going to get into shootouts very much, and you're not going to see a ton of possessions from the Eagles. Again, because they're not one of the higher-paced teams in terms of pace of play.
Yep. Just on Davante Adams quickly, if you told me that Jimmy Garoppolo is fully healthy for the season, I would have Davante Adams 3rd after Jefferson and Chase. But it's just because the risk of him going down, which feels like a 100% chance. It's not a 100% chance, but it feels like a 100% chance he's going to get hurt at some point. And then it's Brian Hoyer, who will still be able to feed Davante the ball, but it's not going to be the same.
And by the way, Adams is a little bit older than the rest of the guys on this list.
Injured at the moment.
He's already injured at the moment.
Right.
Exactly. So that's the other thing where, just a little bit there. But yeah, I mean, about Amon-Ra St. Brown, we've talked about him a ton on the show. Obviously, he's my fantasy ride or die. He's still my fantasy ride or die. Lions training staff drinks free. Like I've said this, since week 13 of 2021, he is the 3rd best wide receiver in fantasy. The only players with more fantasy points at the wide receiver position since week 13 of 2021 are Justin Jefferson and Davante Adams. Amon-Ra St. Brown is an elite fantasy wide receiver, and no one thinks of him. He doesn't get talked about in the same breath as some of these guys, as the Diggs and the Lambs and the Davantes and the Kupps of the world. And the fact is that production-wise, over an extended period of time, has been that way. And nothing that's going to happen this year makes you think that that's going away. In fact, the more, no Hawkinson, Williams is going to miss the first 6 games. There's not a lot of target competition on a team that we think is going to be really good offensively. We like Jared Goff as a quarterback, and again, their schedule, 7 of the final 8 games played in a dome where Jared Goff has been lights out. Last year was unbelievable as a quarterback when he played under a roof.
His target competition is rookies. And
Josh Reynolds.
And Josh Reynolds, right? I mean, seriously, it's Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta. Rookie tight ends historically do not command that much of a target share. So it's all there for Amon-Ra St. Brown to be the entire offense.
Yeah. Oldest wide receiver in the NFL, Marvin Jones. Yes. Has research confirmed that, by the way? Can someone confirm who the oldest wide receiver in the NFL is? But Marvin
Jimmy
Jones,
Graham doesn't count, by the way. He's still tight end.
He's
That's worry about the franchise tag.
Yeah, exactly. So let's take a look at Tier 3. This group, really interesting because it's all players on the rise, right? You have the Offensive Rookie of the Year from last year, Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, who has just been phenomenal for Miami, Chris Olave, who very well could have won the Offensive Rookie of the Year, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase's running mate, and then Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown's running mate. So the talent on this list here, Barry, is not only ascending, but absolutely tremendous on its own.
And you know what? All these guys, if you go running back, all these guys are viable wide receiver ones on your team. If you start off with running back, or you get you go Kelsey in the first and then a running back in the second. Again, it's not ideal, but Olave I think is going to be special. Wilson's going to be special. Waddle is a no-brainer. Higgins is there, of course, we've already talked about super investor Joe Burrow as his quarterback, but more importantly, Devontae Smith I think becomes really interesting. Since week 2 last year, he was the 12th best wide receiver in fantasy. He was top 8 among wide receivers in both receptions and receiving yards over that stretch, and he had the exact same number of targets in that time frame from week 2 on as A.J. Brown. Again, A.J. Brown is the bigger name. He's the bigger wide receiver. But Devontae Smith, coming out of college, because of his stature,
Slim Reaper.
Slim Reaper. Like, just he doesn't get the kind of respect's not the right word, but he isn't thought of the way that some of these bigger wide receivers are. Maybe it's a similar problem to Amon-Ra St. Brown, but like Devontae Smith can play. He can flat out play. He's got a ridiculous quarterback as well. Look at these numbers here on your screen. Since week 2, over a 16-game season, whatever, week 1, whatever, week 2 on last year, both of them had a 27.7% target share. Devontae Smith actually averaging one more reception per game. 9 less yards per game, 1 fantasy point less per game. Like, really similar numbers ultimately to A.J. Brown, and yet the difference in ADP between them doesn't reflect how close they are in production. Devontae Smith is another year into that system. Like, he's a really good player.
Yep, agreed. And the other thing too, I wouldn't. A.J. Brown's not an injury-prone player, but 2020, 2021, he got hurt both those years, missed a few games. If that happens, then all of a sudden Devontae Smith is going to be a top 10 wide receiver option.
Jay, looking just at how often the Eagles will be favored by a wide margin this year, is there any concern that they just don't need to constantly throw to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, that they just kind of run to a lot of blowouts and they can, like Barry said, kind of a slow pace of play? Does that factor for them in fantasy?
No, I think it'll actually be more favorable to them this year, because we made the joke last year that the Eagles could make the Super Bowl. We're not going to be sure if they're any good because of their schedule just being so insanely easy. And they were in so many positive game scripts for running the ball last season. I think just by virtue of just playing harder teams, even if they are the best team in the NFC, I think they will need to throw more. And so I think Devontae Smith can definitely benefit from that. Connor, on Garrett Wilson, what is his ceiling this year? Like, could he have is 1,600 yards, 12 touchdowns, best wide receiver in football? Is that possible?
I think where the hang-up is maybe the touchdowns. And I know Rodgers would lock on to Devontae Adams in the end zone. And when you hear Rodgers talk, that's who he refers to with Garrett Wilson all the time. But the yardage is going to be massive. I mean, he had over 1,100 last year with the carousel, the laughing carousel they had at quarterback. I think 1,400 is easy for him this year because the targets will be there. This has been the connection from OTAs to camp. Yesterday, Bucs practices. I mean, it's just all Rodgers to Garrett Wilson. So I think a massive season in store because of the targets and the talent.
I'm going to give you something that I don't have a stat for, but just this gut thing, and then we'll move on to Tier 4 very quickly. But Aaron Rodgers wants to have a great year in New York, right? I mean, for a variety of reasons. Obviously, he wants to win a Super Bowl. He made this whole thing. But there's also, there's a part of Aaron Rodgers where he's just he's got that chip in his shoulder. He reads the media reports and everything like that. So my point is he wants not only a great year, wins and losses, but he wants a great statistical year.
100%.
He would love to win the MVP again at age 40 with Nathaniel Hackett again in Jets uniform. And so what happens is you get in close, you get to that 5-yard line, and they're calling Breece Hall off tackle, and he does lick a little like one of these, and he checks out of it, and it's just like, hey, you're going to do that Devontae Adams slant that we've seen so many times, like, hey, Garrett Wilson, just boom, boom, boom. It's going to be one-on-one, and then he's just going to hit Wilson. There's going to be 5, 7, who knows, maybe 10 gimme touchdowns for Aaron Rodgers at some point over the course of the year that he could have checked out of, but he just wants to sort of pad the stats.
100%.
And when he decides to do that, when he says, I'm going to just try to throw a touchdown pass here, it's going to Garrett Wilson. Yeah. That's the point.
Back end of last year, he did the same thing with Christian Watson, who emerged as the best wide receiver on that team. And he's like, all right, well, this is the guy who's the best. He's the guy I trust the most to be able to do something. It's just going to him.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into Tier 4. This is kicked off at number 15 overall by Keenan Allen, followed by DeAndre Hopkins, and then DK Metcalf here, guys. It's funny how much we've talked about all kinds of different wide receivers on this show, and we basically never talk about DK Metcalf. Obviously, Tyler Lockett's been underrated in that offense. They used the first-round pick on Jackson Smith and Jigba, and somehow DK has become the forgotten man by hype, but still in the top 20 here, Barry.
No player had more end zone targets last year than DK Metcalf. In fact, 3 of the 4 years he's played in the NFL, he's been top 3 in end zone targets. He's always a threat to score. Over 5 receptions per game last year, which was a career high. Geno back under center. We think that's a good one. We think that's good for DK Metcalf and his 25% target share from last year. 3 straight seasons with over 24% target share. Yes, they add JSN, but Metcalf is just because he's got so much of a propensity to score, is always kind of got a floor there for DK Metcalf, who, he's just like this physical freak. You know what I mean? He's the first guy to come out of college where I saw him without a shirt and I said, holy crap, that's me. That's like, wow, I have yet to see a guy that looks exactly like me without a shirt off. And finally, when DK Metcalf, when that viral photo went around, I'm like, My wife literally said, like, holy crap, that's you. And I'm like, I know.
We had the same thing on Radio Row with Derrick Henry.
Yes.
Yeah, you couldn't tell them apart.
Couldn't tell us apart. 1,000%. A lot of people are like, why do you wear baggy shirts? And it's like, not to intimidate Jay and Connor. That's why.
Which we appreciate around here.
Yeah,
That's what Manny Ramirez used to do.
DK Metcalf. I think one thing with DK that's an interesting thing to talk about outside of his physique resembling Matthew Berry's is that when we project concerns about target share or carries when there is a rookie coming in, I think that's a little fraught with peril. It's the same thing where everyone's expecting Tank Bigsby to cut into Travis Etienne. It's like, well, he hasn't taken a snap in the NFL yet, so let's just see it before it happens. It's the same thing. Like, I don't think Jackson Smith and Jigba is just going to render DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett irrelevant. Like, I need to see it a little bit. I'm sure he's going to get run, but DK is still clearly the guy you want.
Yeah, by the way, it's always one of those push-pull things. Until you see it, you don't know. But the truth is like, you can make the argument like, hey, he's going to see less targets because JSN's there, but he's also going to see less double teams, right? I mean, like, it's all a balance, and so we'll wait to see. But we know he's insanely talented, and he's going to get a lot of targets, especially in close. DK Metcalf, we like quite a bit.
Back to Tier 4. This is a beefy group here. After DK Metcalf, 18 Deebo Samuel, 19 Calvin Ridley coming off the lost year due to suspension, 20 Amari Cooper, 21 Jerry Jeudy, followed by Terry McLaurin on Barry's Commanders. Mike Williams, there's rumors he's been in the slot a little bit for the Chargers this summer. Christian Kirk for Jacksonville. DJ Moore at 25. We saw what he could do with Justin Fields already taking that screen to the house.
2 Jaguars on the list, 2 Chargers on the list. Amari Cooper is sort of interesting because the reports out of Browns camp have been Watson has been inconsistent. So we just don't know, are we going to get Houston Deshaun Watson, or are we going to get, 5 games from last year Deshaun Watson? Because he was not good last year. If there is one positive, that last year, even though Watson did not look like the guy we remembered, he still had a 25% target share. Like, when Watson was out there, he was looking for Amari Cooper. We do expect them to be more pass-heavy this year. Cooper comes in at number 20 for me in the wide receiver ranks. He had the 3rd most end zone targets last year. I mean, they did, whether it was Jacoby Brissett or Deshaun Watson. He was a big part of that offense. He is the number 1 wide receiver on what we expect to be a better-than-average offense. The question is Watson.
Yeah, I feel like he doesn't really get the credit, Amari Cooper. I think it's because there's this perception he's this hired gun because he's jumped around and this is his 3rd team. But, I mean, the guy's insanely talented and he just produces, and he doesn't have a ton of target competition on that team.
The weird thing is at least last year, there were significant home road splits. And that's been something that has sort of dogged him a little bit throughout his career, where whether it was with the Raiders, whether it was with the Cowboys, like, he was always better at home than he was on the road for whatever reason.
Yep, loves sleeping in his own bed.
I guess
just like
so.
Connor Rogers.
Yes,
Just like Connor Rogers.
Tier 5 kicked off by Drake London. 27 is Marquise Hollywood Brown. And then, Jay, somebody you brought up earlier before, 28, Christian Watson in Green Bay, although he's playing with a different quarterback now in Jordan Love. Do you think that success continues for him?
I think it does. I think the talent is just real. As someone who was cheering against Christian Watson every week last year because I didn't have an Offensive Rookie of the Year ticket on him and it looked like he was coming. He was insane down the end of the season. He was playing like one of the best wide receivers in football. Just the ability to add in with the rushing as well, the jet sweeps that they would run. He was an end zone threat. He was a threat to break a 50-yard screen pass. I think the talent there is crazy. And Jordan Love, I mean, reports have been relatively good about Jordan Love in a way they perhaps haven't been about Deshaun Watson. So, yeah, I think Christian Watson, he is one of the guys in these lower tiers who you could absolutely see ending as a top 15 wide receiver in fantasy if a few things break right.
I might be a little bit too low on Brandon Ayuk, who's my current wide receiver 32. Week 6 on last year in 12 games. He was a top 15 fantasy wide receiver. You think about they're a little bit more gadgety with Deebo Samuel. Obviously, you got McCaffrey there. Like, there's an argument to be made that Brandon Ayuk finishes the year as the number 1 wide receiver in San Francisco, not Deebo Samuel. From a pure wide receiver standpoint, again, they're going to use the jet sweeps with Deebo and, kind of the run-heavy stuff. But, Ayuk is somebody that I think is really interesting. 75 receptions, 1,000 yards, and 8 touchdowns last year. He was one of 11 wide receivers that could say that. Like, Ayuk is somebody that coming out of college, everyone's just like, ooh, Ayuk in a Shanahan offense? I think I'm too low on Brandon Ayuk, honestly. I think he's going to move up a little bit when my rankings updates come out.
Tier 6 kicks off with the rookie Jackson Smith and Jigba, who will fit in Seattle's offense with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. At 36, another rookie, Jordan Addison, the stack there of first-round rookies. And 37, Gabe Davis. of the Bills, somebody who had an inconsistent year last year, Barry, but after the season we found out dealing with that ankle injury for a long time. A lot going on there.
High ankle sprain. Like last year, like it was incredibly frustrating. He was very up and down. He was dealing with a high ankle sprain. You know, a lot of stuff went wrong, and yet he was still like a mid-30s wide receiver last year. I believe he was wide receiver 36 last year, which when you think about everything that went wrong, not help, you know, much more hurt than I think we knew at the time. And, you know, some tough flukiness with the touchdowns. But think about this. Again, after Stephon Diggs, there's no one on the Bills, which we think is going to be one of the best offenses in football and has obviously one of the best quarterbacks. There's no one on the Bills that demands targets. We think Dalton Kincaid can get some. Like, we think, you know, Dawson Knox is still there. Like, we'll see who else. But honestly, it's going to be Stephon Diggs, and it's going to be Gabe Davis on the outside. James Cook, obviously, the running back. And so, like, there's a top 20 season potential in Gabe Davis if fully healthy, puts it all together. Still a very young player. Remember, last year, 47% of his targets came on deep passes. He led all players in average depth of target as well. This is a quote from Josh Allen. Said the Bills need to put Davis in better situations this year, especially the team should put Davis into more catch-and-run situations rather than strictly using him as a boundary and downfield pass catcher, which is what he did. Like, they gave him a ton. You know, it was just like, if you don't come down with this 40-yard bomb, like, you're not doing anything. They're going to use his skill sets more. So I can't quit Gabe Davis, Jay Croucher. I can't quit him.
Last year, Gabe Davis was going as wide receiver 25 in drafts. This year, he's going wide receiver 41. To me, that's too much. That's too much of a drop, given the injury last year. What do you think of Jahan Dotson, Matthew?
Thank you for asking while I was taking a sip of something. Final 5 games last year, over basically a 24% target share. He was wide receiver 17 over that stretch. He led the team with 8 end zone targets. Just from a talent standpoint, I love this kid. I think he's just a baller. Like, I don't have a stat for that, but just I watch this guy and I'm just like, he doesn't play to his size. He's just an absolute baller. He can win. He can win one-on-one matchups. He can win 50-50 balls. I know I like Sam Howell. Again, I'm a homer, but like, I do think Jahan Dotson is really talented. He was productive last year in limited sense, and I think Bieniemy will use him quite a lot more this year.
Our final tier, tier 7 here, Tyler Boyd at 49, Zay Jones at 50, Rashad Bateman at 51. We talked about his upside earlier. Kadarius Toney, who's unfortunately not healthy again, there at 52. Juju Smith-Schuster, expected to be the #1 target in New England, there at 53. Rondale Moore at 54. Alan Lazard now with the Jets at 55. Nico Collins of the Texans at 56. KJ Osborne with Minnesota at 57. Romeo Doubs in Green Bay at 58. 59, DJ Chark Jr. in a Carolina offense that needs to get the targets going somewhere. And 60, Darnell Mooney for the Chicago Bears.
This is where you take your flyers, your Nico Collins, your Darnell Moonies, your Kadarius Toneys of the world, even Rashad Bateman. This is where I want to take a flyer of somebody that could pop. Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBC Sports and RotoWorld.com. Just want to thank you so much for watching what you just watched, or at least being too lazy to click out of it after the autoplay just kept it going. So either way, thank you so much for just letting it scroll by your screen. And now I'd like to ask you respectfully, okay, please subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel for the latest NFL news, fantasy headlines from RotoWorld, and betting analysis from NBC Sports Edge.